What's up, everybody? Unrested back again, and it is a brisk Monday morning. Haven't been back with a video for a whole 24 hours. That's crazy for me. Recently I've been kind of toning down how fast I've been putting them out. It's kind of funny, if you don't put enough stuff out, people will complain. But if you put too much stuff out, people will complain. And if you put out a video a day, people will complain. But if you don't put out a video a day, people will complain. You can never really make anyone happy on YouTube, but hey, that comes with the territory. You know, it's like trolls and haters. That comes with the territory. You want to be a public figure, you're gonna get yelled at. So I shouldn't complain. I should be thankful I have a massive database to constantly upload videos to for free, and an awesome audience like you guys who, for the most part, are 100% positive. Quite honestly, always get awesome responses from you guys that keep me inspired to keep making these videos. So that being said, I'm gonna move on to today would be part 7 of my ramble. I'm finally gonna get to the part where I meet my wife. So we went through a bunch of dating stories, went through a bunch of job stories. I'm gonna just take a break from all those for a bit and move on to the part where I finally meet my wife and settle down in Japan. So we're moving on to 3 years into Japan. And yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and title this, you know, the history of Unrested, not my first week in Japan. Some people were like, why aren't you still calling these first week in Japan? Well, if we're into the 3rd year, it's kind of strange if I title it the first week in Japan. I didn't think it would go this far, but now it has, so be it. 3rd year, and things are okay. I'm pretty settled into an ALT job. It's steady work. It pays all right. It doesn't pay a ton, doesn't make me well off, but, you know, I'm surviving, I'm living. I'm a pretty simple guy. I don't really need a lot to begin with. One day I'm in a bookstore, and it's actually a tsutaya, which is actually a video rental store. But some tsutayas are so big that they have a level that is also books and stuff. And this is one of the biggest ones. It's in Dotonbori. If you ever go to Osaka, you'll probably definitely hit up Dotonbori, and you'll probably definitely see the tsutaya that I was at, where I met my wife. You can go to the area where the tsutaya where Unrested met his wife for the first time. It's now a World Heritage Site. So I was in the tsutaya, and I'm walking around, and I want to hit up some English books because I haven't read a good book in a while, and I'm a pretty ravenous reader. And at the time, I didn't have my Kindle yet. I should say I didn't have the Kindle app, because I don't actually like to use the Kindle. I like to use the Kindle app more, because then I can read books at night. I didn't have my Kindle, so I was still buying books in Japan. Sorry, but you have like the worst selection ever of English books. It really sucks. So you end up going to multiple stores before you finally find an English book you want to read. For the most part, all you ever can find is like classics or like bestsellers. So you've got like Jack London, Call of the Wild, or Harry Potter. Like that's the only 2 books you ever find at every bookstore. I go into this bookstore, I go down to the English level, I'm looking around, and I remember there's a girl there, and I hear her. She's a short little girl, the girl who would one day be my wife. She's short, she's very short. I think my wife is only 4'11". Yeah. I know, like, in America she'd be registered as like a legal midget or something. She's really short. But that never bothered me. I always preferred short girls. I'm not a super short guy myself, but I always just like short girls. I don't always date a lot of tall girls, although I've dated girls as tall as 6'2", so it's like 2 inches over top of me. So I've dated girls way taller than me too. But I've always just preferred shorter girls. Just my subjective opinion. There's nothing really behind that. She's there, and she's super short. Like, my wife's always been so short that anything she ever wants to get that's even a little bit at a medium height, she can't reach. And she's trying to reach up for this book, and I see her trying to reach for it, and she can't get to it because she's just too damn short. And so I've done this before in Japan, where I just see tiny people. There's a lot of tiny people here, reaching up for stuff that's out of their reach, and I just reach up and grab it for them, because come on, be nice, right? And that's all I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to be a creep, not trying to be like, hey there, sexy, let me get this book for you. I'm just like literally getting a book. Okay, so I reach up, I grab the book that she's trying to get, and as I pull it down, I realize what she was trying to get was a Kurt Vonnegut book. And it was Kurt Vonnegut Slaughterhouse-Five. And I'm a pretty big fan of that book, actually. I'm a pretty big Kurt Vonnegut fan. I guess I've probably never talked about that before, but I think I've read almost everything Kurt Vonnegut has ever written. Hold on, I'm gonna move the camera down like this. I don't have my tripod today, so sorry, you're gonna have to deal with me holding the camera. My tripod actually broke. Sucks. If anyone wants to send me a selfie monopod, please do. Mine broke. I don't even know where to go out and buy another one around my area. I'd like to get another one. I think I can get them pretty cheap, but I don't know where to even go. If someone knows where I should go in Osaka, tell me where I should go to get a monopod. So I'm reaching up to grab this book. It's Kurt Vonnegut, and I'm like, oh, Slaughterhouse-Five, this is a really good book. And she's like, oh, you've read it? And so she starts speaking to me in English. I'm like, oh, cool, I can talk to somebody in English about a book that I really like in Japan, which is rare. I don't usually, number one, get to talk in English, and number two, I don't get to talk about English books, number three, I don't get to talk about English books that I really like, and number four, I don't get to talk about authors who write English books that I really like in English. So there's a bunch of things right there that hit me right off the top. I'm like, okay, let's get into a discussion. So we start talking about Slaughterhouse-Five. She's read it before. If you don't know about it, it's pretty much like an anti-war book. It talks about all the horrors of war and everything. It's got this whole weird sci-fi interlude between it with this alien race called the Tremalfadorians, and it just goes on and on about pretty much a lot of anti-war stuff. But the funniest thing is it's satirical with itself. At the very beginning, it starts out and says, writing an anti-war book is about as effective as writing an anti-glacier book. And I always thought that was like the best way to start an anti-war book. It's like, you know, you can do this, you can write anti-war literature, but unless you actually go out and try to do something physically, you're not really doing much. And the book itself says that, and it's, I don't know, I thought that was a pretty awesome revelation by the actual author of the book, that he's not trying to be like, look, I'm some kind of hero writing this. No, it's good literature and it's a good sentiment, but until you actually take the action from the book, then really nothing's being done, and he admits that himself. So anyway, we start talking about that. Those things that I just talked to you about right now is like what I start to get into the discussion with her about. I start explaining like my views on it, and she's like, oh, well, I never even thought about that. That's what it's about, like anti-war. She's like, I just thought it was kind of like an overview of the horrors that this guy went through. And I'm like, well, it is. I mean, it's both. It's the horrors of the main character that he suffers through, but it's also, you know, showing you just how horrible war can be. And she's like, oh, okay. And so we're discussing it, and I'm like, it's getting into like almost like half an hour, 45 minutes, close to an hour of discussion. I'm like, well, do you want to just go like get something to eat and we can keep talking about this? Because there's like restaurants everywhere around this bookstore. It's pretty much an area that's mostly restaurants down in Dotonbori. If you cross over the Dotonbori Bridge next to what's his name, Liko Man. We went to an izakaya, and I remember the izakaya's name is Wadamanchi. We went to Wadamanchi izakaya, sat down, got some tapas. Am I saying that right? Finger food, small dishes of food. We got a couple of those, sat down, and just kept talking about books, man. It was cool, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And I asked her, I said, you know, I feel like we had a really good discussion and talk tonight. You seem like a really interesting girl. Can I see you again? And I gave her my phone number. And a little bit later in the week, she messaged me and said, hey, you know, this weekend I'm free. Did you have time to hang out then? And I said, yeah, why don't I take you to a movie? So I remember I took her to the worst possible movie I could have taken her to. It was a remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still with Keanu Reeves. And you're probably wondering, Scott, why? What made you choose that? Well, the thing that sucks about Japan is oftentimes you're really given a narrow slot of movies to choose from. So you can either choose Japanese movies that are in Japanese, with no English subtitles, of course, and at that time my Japanese wasn't nearly good enough to understand those movies. Not to say that they aren't super interesting, sometimes they are, but for the most part, pretty low production, and the stuff that hits the theaters, you're just kind of like, wow, this is like a made-for-TV movie in America. It's not that great. I mean, there's very few times that a Japanese movie is really, you know, absolutely amazing, breathtaking, incredible story. When you're seeing that stuff in America, like things that come over to America, the reason it's gotten translated and coming over to America and you're seeing it is because it's the best of the best in Japan. There's a lot of shit that comes out in the theater here nonstop. So sorry, it's true. And then the ones that they choose from America are always like the big budget Michael Bay, Leonardo DiCaprio. You know, not that there's anything wrong with those movies. I don't personally like them. I'm not a huge Transformers fan. I like some of the stuff Leonardo DiCaprio's in. Or like Johnny Depp, like Pirates of the Caribbean 4, like, you know, anything he ever makes gets over here right away. They're huge Johnny Depp fans here. So pretty much, unless you're a big star or you're a big director name, your movie doesn't get over here. And so that's the only selection we have. Of course, you know, they knew the Matrix movies and they're like, oh, that guy was in the Matrix, right? This is going to be great. And that's why we got The Day the Earth Stood Still with Keanu Reeves. Another horrible movie, which the original is not so bad, but the remake is bad. It's just bad. There's no other way to go about it. So we watched that. We talked about, I think afterwards we went to go eat, and then we talked about how stupid the movie it was, how Keanu Reeves could also be replaced by a block of styrofoam and have the same level of acting in that movie. Nothing against Keanu Reeves. I think he's a very nice man. I think there's movies that he's really good for. There's movies that he's made, like A Scanner Darkly, that I really liked. But there's some where I feel like the roles are just, oh, okay, this is a person who needs to play an emotionless role. He's really good at that. Let's let him do that. But really, it never comes across to me as like this emotionless, like cold, calculating role. It comes across more as like this airhead surfer still from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. That's just me. Maybe that's what it is. I'm tainted by older 80s movies that he was in and stuff. So whatever. My own personal opinion, my own critique of film, which is not really valid because I'm not a film critiquer, nor is my channel revolve around such. Nonetheless, we hung out, we talked about that, we laughed about all the same stuff. She had kind of the same views as me when it came to like movies and stuff, what she thought was stupid, what she thought was good. She told me what some of her favorite movies were, her favorite bands and stuff, and we shared a lot of the same stuff. Surprisingly, she was really into like indie music at the time, which is kind of rare in Japan. Oftentimes you get most people who are like, the Beatles are awesome. Japan is known to be one of the last countries in the world that still buys Beatles albums like nonstop. So you get a lot of people when you ask them, what's your favorite band? They're like, the Beatles. And they're like, what do you like? I'm like, I like metal. And they're like, oh, I like Black Sabbath too. And I'm like, oh, Black Sabbath, wow, that's going back. So we talk, and I think finally then is when she says, oh, you know, like if we're going to talk about movies, she's like, I've got this whole movie collection. You know, we should hang out sometime and you can watch some of my favorite Japanese movies. And I was like, oh, that's cool. So she came over to my apartment the next time that we had our third date, and she brought over this like thing of DVDs, and we chose some movies out of there. We watched probably to this day the funniest Japanese comedy I've ever watched in my life, called The Magic Hour. It's so funny. It's incredible. If you can ever rent that movie, and I'm pretty sure it's been translated into English, because I remember when I watched it, it had English subtitles. It is just so damn funny. The Magic Hour. And I think even in Japanese it's just called like Magic Hour. And I don't want to get too much into it. I don't want to spoil it because I want people to rent it and watch it. But pretty much it's about an actor who is a failing actor. He's pathetic. He's really bad at what he does. He started out as a stuntman, but he's trying to get into like real acting, but he just doesn't have the skill for it. And so his agent is like desperate for jobs. And one day, while getting accosted by a Yakuza, the Yakuza says that he shouldn't really be scared of him, that he shouldn't really be intimidated by him. Who he should be intimidated by is this really professionally well-known, very famous Yakuza sniper. And he's like, who's that guy? And he's like, oh, well, no one's ever seen his face. No one knows what he looks like. He's like, oh, wait, I've heard of that guy before. Do you want to meet him? And so the guy spares his life and says, yeah, if you can let me meet him, I'll spare your life. And he's like, okay. Because the guy also has a lot of debt to pay off. I think that's why the guy accosts him. That's why he attacks him. And he's like, oh, yeah. Let me go ahead and contact him, and I'll get you in touch with him. So the Yakuza's like, oh, okay. I didn't know you knew the guy. Like, I would have brought it up earlier if I'd known this. And he's like, yeah, no problem. So what he does is he goes back to his actor and says, hey, look, I got this awesome job where you're going to play a Yakuza sniper. And he's like, what? Oh, that sounds like an awesome role and everything. So he gets him into character and everything, and then brings him over to meet this Yakuza boss. And pretty much what you have is you have a Yakuza boss who seriously thinks he's meeting like the most well-known but unseen sniper that's ever existed within the Yakuza clans. And then you have this guy who's acting, and like his acting is bad, so it's like really overacted, and they just don't know why. Like they don't know why he's like pretending to be like way too tough and like way too serious, and like he does all kinds of wacky stuff. Or if he messes up something that he says, he'll walk out the door and walk back in and say it again because he thinks it's like a scene in a movie. It's so funny. Oh man, I don't think my description does it justice, but you should definitely check it out. I've only just given you pretty much like the very beginning of it. It gets crazier and crazier as it goes on, so it's pretty funny. So we watched that. We had a good time, and I realized like, wow, we share the same sense of comedy too, and everything. Like we really think the same type of stuff is funny. Because I'd watched some Japanese humor before, and I couldn't tap into it. I'm not as much into the like the manzai thing, or like the smart guy and the dumb guy like type manzai situation. Those are sometimes a little bit funny, but like they're so repetitive. Or a lot of Japanese comedians, which what I don't really find funny is like the first time they do something is pretty damn hilarious, but when you hear their same line again and again and again, and like they'll have this like catchphrase, and they'll just like say it, and the audience will go wild, and I'll be like, well, that was like funny like the first time, but now you're like, this is the 50th show you've been on where you just say the same catchphrase. Like it really loses its, humor at this point. Like who thinks this is funny? And she agreed with that. She's like, yeah, you're right. Like a lot of like the main comedians that are out there that are famous, I don't really like them either, because they just never mix up their show. And like that, it's kind of funny because there's a lot of guys out there who do that, but then they just disappear into nothingness. Like I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that guy Hard Gay, kind of a controversial character. He's totally broke and out of work. Like he hasn't worked in ages, and that's because he only had one gig. He had that one character he made up, and after it was finished, it was finished. Like eventually everyone was like, gosh, this isn't funny anymore. And like he's all dried up. Like he tried to become like a model after that, and that didn't work out. He tried to do other stuff, but he's just totally dried up. He doesn't have any work, hasn't had work for ages. So we both talked about that, and how we had like the same kind of thoughts on that like this was the funniest comedy we had ever seen in Japan, and that like that if more movies were like this, that they'd be really funny, and that was the same sense of humor. And then she told me some of the other stuff that she thought was funny too, and I was really kind of surprised because it was movies you don't really often hear Japanese people talk about, like Anchorman. She thought that was funny, and like for, of course, in America, if we say Anchorman, everyone knows right away Will Ferrell. Like not a lot of Japanese people know about Will Ferrell's comedy and stuff like that in Japan. It's not nearly as popular. People, if you told them about Zoolander, even people who watch a lot of Western movies haven't heard of Zoolander. They don't know Zoolander at all. They don't know Ben Stiller. They don't know any of that stuff. So I was really surprised how much she knew about that stuff. So I was like, oh wow, I can actually share because I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to another country trying to find a girlfriend who has all the same likes as me. I know it's going to be Japan where everything's a little bit different. It's nice to have somebody like her who has that, all the different stuff, but also knows the common type stuff as me as well in my own country, because there's times where you want to make jokes or references to a movie or something you saw, and if the person's never watched that stuff, you just can't do it. Or like something that goes on in your life, you're like, oh, this is just like this, ha ha ha, and they're like, I've never even heard of that show. And don't get me wrong, like the same type of thing happens vice versa too. Japanese people reference TV shows or say like, oh, you look like this guy from this TV show, and you're like, what? And finally when you look it up, you're like, okay, I can finally understand this now, but I totally didn't get it at the time because I didn't know the reference, the TV show, or the character. And so when you both have some commonality like that, when you both have some same ground that you can be landed on and see eye to eye with, that really works out well for, I guess, if you're going to get married to someone in this country and want to share humor and stuff with them, if that kind of thing is important to you. I'm not saying that needs to be vital to every marriage. Some people don't even care about any sense of humor at all, which I guess that can work out, but for me, I need things to be a little bit lighthearted, especially in a romantic relationship where things can get dicey at times. So we went from there to being boyfriend and girlfriend. I think it was pretty much official after that night. And we started seeing each other more and more, and I think it turned into like a regular weekend thing where she would come over every weekend. We'd hang out at my apartment. We'd either rent movies or watch movies or watch stupid stuff. I think like one night all we did was like show each other our favorite music videos on YouTube, and she showed me all the favorite Japanese ones, and I showed her all my favorite American ones. We learned a lot about music from both countries, You know, a lot of stuff that might just be totally common in my country, but she'd never heard of, or stuff that might be common in hers that that I never heard of course. So that was really cool too, that we could share that. And it moved on from there into finally one day I said, you know, like, you're over here every weekend, and she was leaving more and more stuff over at my place. She had like a pair of pajamas and everything like that. And I was like, you know, you can just move in if you want, like, because I knew she lived alone, it was actually kind of rare. Usually, until a woman gets married in Japan, oftentimes they live with their parents, but she lived totally alone. I said, you know, you can move in if you want, like, you don't have to keep coming over all the time. And this had been like after a couple months already. And I mean, I think it's probably a little bit fast, but whatever. Things were going good. I felt really comfortable. I felt like I had met the person who was giving me everything I ever wanted out of a relationship, and hoped, I guess I felt like she felt the same way back, that she was getting everything she wanted. As of so far, she hadn't complained, and I mean, even today, we still are very happy, married for going on 6 years now, wow. So, yes, we're still very happy. And she kind of laughed at that. She's like, why would I move into your place? And I was just kind of like, oh shit, maybe that was too soon, or I was too direct, and she's like, no, it's not that I, like, don't want to move in with you. She's just like, you know, I don't live in a tiny ass apartment like you do. Like, I live in a big ass house. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. And I had forgotten about this. She had rented an entire house to herself. She was like a super independent woman. Like, and, you know, it wasn't anything that I'd like brought up before. I had been like, wow, it's so amazing, like, how independent you are, and like how you got your own house. Because that's pretty rare in Japan for a woman to like be a super hardcore career woman, who's, you know, done everything from rent her own house to move out of her parents' house to get into a really hardcore medical career like my wife had. It's not as common as it is in Western America. I'll put it that way. You know, I'm not trying to say it isn't possible or isn't easy for women to do. I'm sure many women are smart enough, strong enough, and powerful enough to get into that. It's just not as common. There's more of an older 1950s America kind of housewife feel here in Japan, and it's not me trying to, you know, bring women down or anything. It's just the way the place works, man. It's just kind of old school here, you know. It's just how the country still moves. So I was like, oh shit, yeah, that's right. You've got like a big ass house. Why am I asking you to move into my mansion? Which mansion in Japan doesn't mean an actual mansion. It means a one-room apartment. Now, I had like a little hallway. I had a kitchen, and I had a little bathroom, and I had a little washer dryer area, but it was still a mansion. It was tiny as hell. And I was just like, well, I didn't want to just like, you know, force myself into your place, be like, I need to come move all my shit to your place. So, but when she offered, then I was like, oh yeah, okay, that makes more sense. So that's what we did. We moved all my stuff over to her place. And after I moved into there, things were still going really good. You know, we had our hills and valleys, our ups and downs, of course, like every relationship does. Of course, you also have that, you know, whole getting used to the co-inhabiting thing. It's something I recommend to anybody and everybody who ever thinks about marriage ever in their life. You need to co-inhabit a place first with the other person. I don't care if you're male and male, female and female, male and female, hetero, homo, lesbian, whatever the fuck you are. You need to live with that person first. You need to see if you can stand to live with that person first. If you don't drive each other nuts, if you don't drive each other insane. And I'm not saying like there's arguments or things like that that are going to erupt, but there can be everything down to, do they leave wet towels on the floor? Do they not clean up after themselves? You know, do they come home crazy hours? Do they go out really late without you and hang out with their friends and then come home and wake you up and shit? Like, you know, not saying that any of that stuff is wrong or makes them a bad person, but if you can't stand it, you can't live with them. So just co-inhabit first. See if you can actually do it. Well, we did it, and it worked. Like I said, there was hills and valleys. I think for me, the hardest part was letting go of kind of a little bit of my wild life. I still was living a little bit of a wild life, going out to party with friends a little bit. I had just lost that job at KIS only a year ago, and I was still good friends with them, trying to hang out with them a little bit and still give her time. But I started to calm down on that too, and she had kind of her own friends too, where once I started to meet them and get comfortable with them, I didn't mind going out with everybody together, my friends, her friends, all together. And so it made it work out way easier, where we were still both getting to go out and hang out and have a good time, but we were also with both of our sets of friends as well. So that started to work out well. And so we got into like 8 months. We're living together for about 8 months now. That's not including our dating time before and stuff like that. And we're moving into close to a year, I remember, at that point. And finally, I remember one night, I was laying there in bed, and I was like, damn, things are pretty fucking good, man. Got a pretty decent job, met a pretty decent girl, and she was a girl, I think. Now here's the thing, and I'm just saying these are my own subjective wants and needs from a girl, okay? Like, I'm not saying these are the right things. I'm not saying this is what all men need to look for. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying these worked out for me, okay? So don't judge everybody by this, you know. Even if you want to think that I'm a chauvinistic pig or whatever, that's fine, but don't judge other guys by me. Things I looked for in a woman that she had. Number 1, independent. Number 2, not clingy. Number 3, can handle their own shit, like doesn't need to come to me to make decisions and stuff like that on major things. Like, you know, you want to buy a car, fucking do it as long as you've got the right credit and the money to, you know, pay it off. Like, you want to get a house or something, you know, you want to do big things, you want to pursue a certain level in your career, should you do it or not? I mean, you know, you can come to me to analyze it, but really the choice is yours, especially if it's a career as specific as something in the medical world, which, you know, I don't have any knowledge in. I'm good with art maybe and teaching, but if you tried to ask me a specific something about your career to make a choice, that's on you. But on top of that, like, things like, number 1, you know, how are our conversations? How are our, like, interactions with each other? How are our social interactions? Because you got to remember, your social interactions with each other are by far what is most important in a long-term relationship, in a marriage, in a co-inhabiting situation. If you're going to go out there, and this goes for you men and women both, okay? If you're going to go out there and you're going to look for a hot piece of ass, I want you to know that that hot piece of ass has a shelf life, okay? Like, over time, no matter what, no matter how handsome, no matter how beautiful that person is, they've got a shelf life. They're going to be dwindling eventually down to something that is just as mundane or even possibly ugly as the rest of the world, whatever you want to call it. And in the end, the only thing that's left after that shell crumbles is that social interaction underneath. Can you live with that social interaction the rest of your life? Are you constantly fighting with that? Are you constantly at war? Are you at odds? Do you not agree on a lot of the same stuff? If you answer yes to a lot of these questions, no matter how many 1s you have or 10s you have in any other department, if there's a 0 in another, multiply that and you still got 0. Okay, the total sum comes to 0. You know, that's just my little bit of advice. I'm not saying, you know, you need to go by what I do 100% to meet, you know, your loved one, your married person, you know, whoever you're going to live the rest of your life with. But that was just my own little philosophy, okay? And she had all that stuff. I remember I laid in my bed all that night. Well, in our bed, we were in the same bed. All that night, the night that I started to really think about marriage. And I laid there. I remember we went to bed around 11 o'clock, and I didn't go to sleep all night. And it wasn't until I woke up the next morning. She woke up the next morning. I didn't actually go to sleep at all. I stayed awake all night thinking about it. So like 8 hours straight, or more maybe, thinking about, was I going to ask her to marry her? And when I woke up that day, I said, hey, you know, like, today's a day off. Can we go to Osaka Joe? And she's like, oh, okay, that's kind of weird, like, but okay, whatever. Like, usually I was up for, like, going down to city type areas, not like nature type esque areas like Osaka Joe or Hokoku Shrine or something like that. And that was the area I wanted to take her to, was this Hokoku Shrine next to Osaka Joe. And it's like this really, like, nature filled area in the middle of the city. It's kind of like, imagine, like, you know, the parks in the middle of New York. That kind of look that it has, that kind of feel it has, where it's really beautiful nature in the middle of the big city. And I took her to this really enclosed little area. I walked her through this path. I knew it before because I'd been there a couple times. Before I'd even met her and stuff, I'd been down to Osaka Joe, and it's a huge area. You can really get secluded, get away from the crowds of Japan. And that's where I got down on one knee behind this shrine, and I said, you know, hey, I'm really serious. Do you want to marry me? I think I said it that way too. I wasn't like, will you marry me? I was like, hey, I'm really serious. This is a very serious question. I got down on my knee and I said, will you marry me? Like, you know, and spend the rest of your life with me? And she couldn't believe it. She was like, what? Like, and at first I was like, oh shit, like, she's definitely gonna say no. Fuck, like, maybe this is the wrong time. But she said yes, of course, because we got married. And later I was like, well, why'd you say, like, what? Like, why was your first, your first thing, like, what? Well, she's just like, I just totally didn't think we'd ever be getting married. Like, I didn't think you saw your life with me. And I was like, why? And she's just like, sorry, I just have, like, low self-esteem sometimes. And, like, I didn't think we'd get married. Although there was something in the back of my mind. I'm like, well, what was going on? And she's like, well, do you remember when I took this trip to Okinawa and, like, So she always had to travel down to Okinawa sometimes for business, and there was always like this psychic lady she would visit there, and this lady, like, I don't really believe in psychic stuff. I don't believe in like telling the future type shit like that. But she'd always go to this lady because she liked to buy these like stones to make these bracelets there, and it was kind of just like a crafts shop. And on the side, the lady did like psychic type stuff, but she did it totally for free. She wasn't like one of these people that was like, step into madam's, back place and we will tell your future. Like, it was like one of these ones where if you asked her on the side, like, oh, hey, word is around town that you're like got a little bit of psychic power. Like, what is that? Like, what can you do? And she would just help people out. Like, she'd be like, oh, well, let me take a look at your palm and I'll let you know what I can do. For you, maybe I can't do anything. And she would never charge people. She would just tell them what they knew. I think she did like palmistry, like all that kind of stuff. And she said she had been going to that woman for a long time. She had known her for ages. And she said the last time she came, the woman was like, hey, can I talk to you about something? And so my wife was like, yeah, well, what's up? She's like, well, here's two things I see in your future. She said, either one, you want to move back to Okinawa, because she was from Okinawa before. She wasn't born in Okinawa, but she had worked in Okinawa before, and before she had met me, she was actually on the way of planning to moving back there because she just enjoyed the environment. Okinawa was pretty relaxed compared to the big city of Osaka. She's like, I know you're kind of thinking about that. She said, but you're dating a guy right now. And she's like, oh yeah, did I tell you about that? She's like, no, but I kind of got the sense that you're dating a guy right now. She said, well, look, here's two things I can tell you. If you stay in Osaka, that guy's going to marry you. And you're probably going to have at least 1 or 2 kids with him, and it's going to be a boy. And if you move to Okinawa, that's okay too, but you're not going to get married. And you're just going to start your career here and continue to be a single woman in a career, which is fine too, because you can continue your career in Osaka and be married, or continue your career and be single here and be married. But that's just what I'm seeing in your future. I'm just, I'm getting a big glance into that. And she was like, what, really? And so she told me that story after, and I was like, whoa, that's crazy. So like she predicted that we'd get married, and she's like, yeah. She's never told me anything like that before. Like any boyfriends in the past I've ever had, she's just like, nah, whatever. Like, he's cool, but I don't really see much of a future. Like, and she didn't know, like, she never met these guys or anything. She never met me or anything. Like, she wasn't some kind of woman who was just like, out to hate men or anything like that. Or like, give people false information. She's just like, this is just what I'm feeling. I mean, you can take my advice and throw it away. I'm not charging you for it. You don't need to listen to it. It's just what's coming to my mind. It's my intuition. And which is even weirder though, is because she got that part right, that we would get married and that my wife would of course stay in Osaka because we're still in Osaka. But she also got like that we would have a kid and that we'd have 2 kids and that they would be boys. Like she got all that right too. I mean, like I said, I'm a very skeptic. I don't believe in a lot of this stuff. I don't put faith in just about damn near everything that has to do with spiritual or things that I can't see or tangible or proved by science, but that was pretty weird. My wife's more into that stuff, so when she, when I asked her that, she said like, luckily she had already had that good omen from that lady, and she said, yeah, like, on top of that, she was of course very happy that I asked, but she was also really happy that it had matched up with something she had seen in her future to begin with. So that was how we got married. That was what we did. We had a classical Japanese style wedding. People always ask me for pictures of it, but it's got a lot of family stuff. It's got my family in there. It's got her family in there. And with the way the internet works, you can't put people's pictures out there. You can't put people's information out there that don't want it out there. I've put enough of my stuff out there, and sometimes that comes back to me. So I'm not going to do that to my family or her family or my wife or my kids. You'll never see them on the internet, sorry. That's their choice. If one day my son wants to, one of my sons, I have 2, if one of them wants to become Unrested Junior, that's fine. I more than support them. I will give them all the technology they need to do that. That's fine. But until then, they won't be on the internet, sorry. And that being said, from there, we actually, very quickly after, only 1 year after getting married, my wife was pregnant with our first kid. Maybe I'll stop it here and I'll go through what it was like to have my first kid in Japan. First kid ever in my life. So, and in Japan. So, some other stuff there too. I went to my first pet funeral, which was interesting. I went through getting my first house in Japan, buying my first house. that was interesting. So that's what I'll save for the next story. But that was pretty much me meeting my wife and getting to know my wife and marrying her, and beautiful wedding. Really, man, it was really awesome. We married at the same shrine that I proposed to her at Hokoku Shrine in Osaka-jo. You can go find that. It's a shrine dedicated to Abisu, the god of business, which he's pretty much everywhere in Japan. It was crazy expensive. You have to pay $1,000 for 1 hour to rent that place. I had straight up all kimonos, like it was like a 7-layer kimono. It was heavy as hell to wear. You could barely move. Luckily, I did it in the middle of the winter. I highly suggest that to anyone who's going to get married Japanese style. Do it in the winter because you're going to wear a billion layers. My wife had the big white kimono with the giant egg hat. That egg hat is funny. You know, the history behind that is that the women wear that to hide their horns from the man so that they don't know their demon side. I'm not making that up, man. That's part of Japanese tradition and everything. You can see a little bit sexist there back in Edo era. We did that, and then we had the Western style reception, which is pretty common these days in Japan. We opted out of some stuff. Like, one thing that's really common in a Japanese reception is to like play bingo and win prizes. I was just like, no. People just talked, we ate, we had fun, we enjoyed each other. We had a really good time. We actually had our reception at a place called Kanabe. If any of you are ever looking to get married in Osaka, I would highly recommend Hikoku Shrine and Kanabe as your place for your reception. They did an amazing job. The food was amazing. It was French food that was just incredibly well done. It was great. We had a great time, great night. We hit up a bar after that with the friends who came to the marriage. Busan Kevin was at my wedding, another famous J-vlogger. There you go. Were any other J-vloggers at my wedding? I don't think so. Just Busan Kevin. So there, I can talk about another famous J-vlogger who was at my wedding. Yay. And then my life progresses from there. So I'll stop it here. We're at almost 40 minutes, so if I go any longer, it's going to be too much of an earful to listen to. I hope you enjoyed this today. If you did, I will continue on with the history of Unrested in Japan. Where I go from here, who knows? I'll get into like buying a house, having a kid, raising a kid, what hospitals are like, a little bit of everything, I guess. If you like what you saw here, like, comment, and subscribe. I am Unrested. Have a good one.